Welcome. What we will do in this demonstration is to just focus on the ground itself and see how we can actually just draw a nice drawing just focusing on the ground and giving it a nice feel using different kind of ground covers and things like that. So in other demonstrations we have drawn something like this. So what we have done is to create different elements like trees and different foliage, and on for the ground we essentially covered it with a kind of grass and some flowers, but still the overall the ground didn't have any other kind of interest. So what we will do in this demonstration is to just focus on the ground itself and see how we can actually create a nice drawing just by having different things on the ground and just adding a few things here, few things there. So what let's start by having our distant line. So this is the line that I put down over here, right? So this is a distant line, and what I will do next is to just put down other lines that kind of defines a bit of planes on the ground itself. So a line like this, for example, another line like this, something like this over here, something like this. So essentially what we are doing now is to essentially defining the bit of irregularities on the ground. So when you see a ground, there are some kind of bit of shape to the ground. The ground is never flat. So essentially if you have a distant line, your ground as it goes across in the distance, this is never flat as such, but there are some kind of bit of irregularities in terms of a small plane here, small plane there. In other demonstrations we use this approach where we drew these explicit planes like something like this. So that's one approach, but here what we are taking is a very long view, and we are showing all these different planes that are kind of hidden behind each other and things like that. But what we are doing now in this demonstration is to take a closer look of the ground itself, right? And then we're trying to capture a bit of charm that a ground has in terms of its imperfections and different things like that. So the way you do it, you start by putting down these different lines that reflect a bit of imperfections, or different kind of things that you have on the ground. And then what we'll do is to simply add some things to these lines to kind of bring out visual interest for the ground. So I just put down some of these lines, and what I do next is to add some kind of different element, a ground cover to these lines. So let's start by essentially laying down a kind of this will be our distant line. So let's lay down this line as our most distant line. And what I will do is to have a bit of a tree line, distant tree line. So I start by adding a distant tree line to this line over here. So as you have seen before, you can add a distant tree line just by using these parallel lines, and I again use these lines and something like this. So this defines a distant tree line that we have for this line over here. And then what I will do is to darken the bottom of the distant tree line a bit over here. So this is the distant tree line. And then what I can do is I can then add something else, some other kind of ground cover for this line over here. So I will say, let me just add a bit of bush over here. So right, we have seen to add a bush, use this kind of loop stroke and just add it in a shape something like this. So that's what I will do, and I'll just add a bit of bush over here, something like this, right? And always you have to make the bottom of the bush a bit darker than the top. So in the tutorial we took a closer look at drawing a bush with foliage, and then you just made the bottom a bit darker to give it nice form or density. So there we have it. So on this line I just added bush, and what you can do in between these white spaces, so what we will do here is to just have some kind of indication of a ground cover. We will not be using this kind of grass stroke that we used in other demonstrations, because this grass stroke is good to provide a kind of uniform coverage to the ground. So when you have other elements of interest and you want to just have the ground to have some kind of ground cover, then you can use this kind of grass stroke. But what we will do over here, since the ground itself is the main focus, I will just add a bit of something like this. So essentially what I'm doing is to just adding a bit of random even lines or dots, that kind of suggests that there's something on the ground, right? But I am not doing a uniform kind of grass cover for the ground. Over here what we can do is we can just have a bit of twigs, for example, coming out of here, right? Something like this, for example. So just draw a line. So to draw a twig in a distance, you just again draw a tapered line. So draw a line, taper it at the base, something like this, and then add a bit over here, a bit over there, so something like this, right? So this suggests this kind of bare twig over there. So this is what we have right over there. And then over here you can again suggest some kind of bush as well, right? So essentially what I'm done is I started by just drawing these different lines that indicates a bit of surface irregularities on the ground. So essentially these are different planes, and essentially what we are saying is that we have some element of visual interest that these lines demarcate. And what I'm next doing is to add some kind of visual interest behind these lines. And this doesn't have to be anything in particular, essentially pen is great at providing strokes like this, so this essentially just tells me that there's something, some kind of a small, maybe a twig or a foliage, something like this, but you don't really have to have a very clear indication of what it is, and that is the attribute that we are using in this drawing. So essentially just add a bit of dots, marks, something like this, that suggests some kind of foliage, some kind of element of nature, something like this, for example. So you can use these leaf strokes, or you can just add a bit of line here, something like this. So this is essentially a very cool way to just improvise. So this is more like an improvisational drawing, where just I draw a few lines and then I kind of define a nice elements in that cover our ground, something like this. And in between again here, just draw a dot, something like this. So just add a bit here, a bit there. So essentially now you're having a very kind of improvisational drawing, where what you're doing is simply adding some of these twigs, some of these leaves, or having a twig and things like that. So here just by adding this indicates that there's some kind of tall grass or something like that over here, and so that is the kind of feel that we want for our ground covers to have be covered within a tall grass or some kind of foliage or things like that. So essentially you use these very organic shape lines, something like this, right? And then add a bit of foliage, so that indicates a cool way to have some kind of ground cover that consists of either a flower or a tall grass or what have you. And then I'll do something similar over here. So here I just kind of very improvisational, so I just add a bit dot here, bit dot there, and over here then I can add a bit more bush as well. So you can add even a combination of a bush like this, or a kind of twigs, or some kind of tall grass. So essentially these different lines, they kind of define a bit of different ground, different kind of imperfections against which you can draw these different elements to add visual interest to the ground. So essentially what we're doing is just we started by drawing these different lines that represent some kind of undulations or some kind of imperfections on the ground, and against which we add these different elements. We start by adding a distant tree line, then here is a small bush, just add a bit over, something like this, and then we can even add some kind of twigs, or a bit more bush or tall grass, or what have you, right? So just play with it. So this kind of drawing is my favorite, in terms of just sitting with a small sketchbook and just adding bit here, bit there, and just to kind of come up with something that is so cool. And over here, as you get closer, you can decide if you want to have some something more clear. So for example here, if you want, you can have kind of some wildflowers over here, right? A bunch of wildflowers over here that we have seen before. So so here I decided to add a bit, bunch of wildflowers, something like this, right? So you can just kind of decide what you want to add at these different places, but the whole point is to give it an interesting feel by kind of having different strokes. So essentially the most important thing in pen and ink is not to use the same stroke in a concentrated manner. So essentially I have vertical lines, this suggesting a distant tree line. Here I have these kind of loops, here I have a bit of twig. So these are different strokes, right? And when you use different strokes in this manner, it adds visual interest. Your eyes are kind of taking in these new strokes, new elements, and kind of enjoying that process. So that's what you have to do, just add a bit here, a bit there, but just use different strokes. So here I drew some flower, here I have some indication of kind of a bit of foliage over here, and some kind of bush over here, for example, something like this, right? And over here, if you have nothing, you can just simply add a bit of darkness over here. That suggests that there's some kind of a bit of depth in that surface over there. So just even adding a bit of dark, and if you want, just add a bit more, something like this. So here you have it, right? So this this in itself becomes interesting. So something like this, you can add a bit dark over here. So this kind of organic shape. So this is great thing with the pen, is that you can just use any kind of organic shape, and suggest that there's some kind of ground cover or foliage or some kind of things on the ground, and make it interesting. And the important thing is to just keep it random, right? So here now this, so essentially I've really added nothing in particular, but now the ground is looking a bit interesting. It has a nice different plane line, these different lines that define some imperfections, and then I drew some different kinds of things against it. And for example here there's a bit of white space, so I can just go ahead and add a bush over here, right? So I just start adding a bush over there, something like this. So something like this, right? So you can even draw a line and darken the base, and there we have something like this. So now you can see that how your ground is now getting interesting in itself. So this is a very cool thing that I like to do, and this is a great way to kind of just improvise and just kind of play and have some kind of creative outlet whenever you have, even few minutes to spare, because this is something that you can be quickly done. Just draw a few lines and just kind of, let your, pen wander. So here, for example, I just let my pen wander, go out, something like this. So, strokes like this, just make sure that you do not kind of stuck in the process of, having this constant line, but, something that's a bit curvy, and then add a bit of black here, a bit of black there, just to kind of define a bit of, either a, a flower or something else. So essentially something like this, right? So you're defining a bit of, and always remember to also taper it, so if you just have flat, so if you have something like this and you have a shape like this doesn't look too organic, having a tapered shape, something like this is much more, organic looking. So that's what I do. So over here I can try to, provide a bit of taper, but essentially what I'm doing is just simply adding a bit, something like this, and just letting my pen wander, and something like this, that just suggests some kind of, tall grass, or a bit of foliage, a bit of kind of, bush or what have you, right? And then you can even darken it just to the base, just to bring out that there is some kind of either the ground as a whole, or something like this, right? So that adds interest as well. So there we have it, right? So I just added something quickly over here to make it interesting. So now you can see, this is a very different composition than what I've we have seen in other drawings, where I actually had some elements like trees or a big background, distant foliage or mountains or what have you. But over here I'm just drawing few lines to indicate my ground, and then just focusing on the ground, and I'm actually not having a bit of tree or anything like that, but just distant, a different ground foliage, different elements of it, just to make it interesting. And there we have it. And in this closest over here, if you want, I can add some stones. And the other simplest way to add a stone is just add a bit of this darkness, something like this. So this indicates a stone. So you can actually just put something like down, something like this over here, something like this, that indicates a bit of stone as well. So drawing stone I cover in other tutorials in detail, but this is here you want to show small pebbles or stones or what have you. You just draw dark like this. So this is a real fun thing to do with pen, and in my opinion, something like this is real fun, because what you're doing is just like you're using the real power of pen to suggest. You're suggesting a bit of foliage here, bit of foliage there, some kind of ground cover here, some kind of ground cover there, and this is really kind of something that pen is really good at, and this is something that's very enjoyable and fun to do as well. And what I can do finally over here, if you want, is to actually use your typical grass cover stroke that we saw before. Something like this, so you can actually have a bit of indication of grass over here as well, right? So something like this. So what I've done essentially is to have a lot of different combination of things in this demonstration, something, some strokes that you can use to kind of provide different kind of ground cover, and not even just ground cover, but just to have a visual interest on the ground, right? So something like this, and you can always add a bit of line over there, just to suggest there's something on the ground, something like this. So this line suggests there is some kind of imperfections, a bit of undulation of the ground or what have you. And then what you do is then you draw some kind of an interesting ground cover against these lines to kind of bring them out, something like this, right? So there we have. So I just highlighted them. And you can even make it a bit curved, right? So these are flat, but this is a bit an angle, but you can even make it a bit curved like this. So a lot of possibilities. So this doesn't really have any limitation in terms of how you do it. It's just your imagination, right? Just draw, put down a few lines. So for example, here I can have something like this, and here I can indicate that there is just kind of a bit of hole in the ground, or some kind of unevenness. So there we have it. Just by adding this, this indicates that there's some kind of unevenness in the ground over here. So this is something, so you can do so simply, so easily. And I'll just continue by adding a few more grass strokes over here. And there we have it, just simply. So what I essentially did is to simply, start by laying down these different lines on my ground that kind of suggest some kind of imperfections, and against those lines I just drew some kind of foliage, right? Some kind of quick ground cover, that consisted of, having a distant tree line, and then kind of bare bush, some kind of bush foliage, some kind of, tall grass or twigs or what have you. And again, just by adding this kind of organic shapes, something like this, you're able to kind of give a nice feel for something there, right? And by using different strokes, you're able to create a lot of interest and variety for these kind of ground covers as well. So there we have it, just a quick drawing we did, and this is something that you can just enjoy doing anytime. Just even if you have a small piece of paper, just put down some lines and just let your pen wander. And this is great at actually getting practice for drawing your foliage or what have you. So being able to draw these kind of organic shapes in pen is great in terms of being able to then use it to draw other elements like tree foliage, mountains, or what have you. So essentially, this is a great way to just let your pen wander, just let your creative instincts come out and just enjoy putting something on the ground, and essentially just have a ground that looks interesting because it has all these different elements on it. Thanks. Take care. Bye bye.